January 16th, 2023, 8:15 in the morning. La Maddalena Clinic, Palermo, Sicily. A thin man in a brown leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low walked through the front entrance for what appeared to be a routine oncology appointment. He carried a small bag and moved with the calm of someone who had done this many times before. On paper, he was registered under the name Andrea Bonafede. He even smiled at the receptionist, blending into the quiet rhythm of a hospital morning where nothing unusual seemed to be happening. Within minutes, that illusion collapsed completely. 100 Carabinieri officers in tactical gear flooded the lobby, submachine guns raised, red laser sights locked onto his chest. A colonel stepped forward, the entire room frozen in controlled silence, and asked a single question. "What is your real name?" The man paused, exhaled slowly, and answered without resistance. Matteo Messina Denaro. 30 years on the run ended in 20 seconds. He did not run. He did not fight. He simply stood there, an aging cancer patient with a colostomy bag hidden under his shirt. The most wanted man in Europe, finally brought to an end by a moment of precision and timing. This was not just the capture of a fugitive. It was the closing chapter of an era in Sicilian organized crime. Matteo Messina Denaro was widely considered the last great boss of Cosa Nostra, a man who had once boasted that he could fill an entire cemetery with his enemies. He had been convicted in absentia for mass murder and for his role in the 1992 bombings that killed anti-mafia judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. Since 1993, he had existed as a ghost. No confirmed photographs after his early 30s, no traceable phone calls, no digital footprint that could expose him. For 3 decades, he moved through western Sicily like a shadow that refused to solidify, protected by a network so deeply embedded in society that an entire region became his silent fortress. To understand how such a man could survive for so long, you have to step back into Castelvetrano, a quiet town in western Sicily surrounded by olive groves, farmland, and ancient ruins. It was here that Matteo was born in 1962, into a family already deeply rooted in the Mafia hierarchy. His father, Francesco Messina Denaro, known as Don Ciccio, was a powerful clan boss who treated violence as routine and authority as inheritance. In that environment, childhood was not defined by innocence but by exposure. By his teenage years, Matteo was already inside the machinery of organized crime. By 14, he had handled weapons. By 18, he had already taken lives. In this world, survival was not about morality, but adaptation. The Messina Denaro clan did not resemble the chaotic stereotypes of mafia families often portrayed in fiction. There were no public displays of rage or uncontrolled violence. Instead, they operated like a corporate structure deeply embedded in the economic fabric of Sicily. Olive oil exports, construction contracts, garbage collection, supermarket chains, and later European Union agricultural subsidies all passed through systems of control. Every sector of local economy carried a hidden percentage that flowed upward into the organization. From an early age, Matteo learned a central principle that would define his entire life. Real power is not violence itself, but the silence that protects it. As he grew older, he became both feared and respected within mafia circles. He was tall, composed, and striking in appearance, often seen wearing designer clothing, sunglasses, and driving expensive cars through streets where most people lived modestly. He read classical history, admired Julius Caesar, and kept the Godfather novel on his nightstand. His personal life remained fragmented. He had a daughter, Lorenza, born in 1996, whom he supported financially but never openly acknowledged in public life. Even in a world built on secrecy, he maintained a deeper layer of privacy around his emotional ties. His rise within Cosa Nostra was cemented in 1989 when he took part in the elimination of a rival Mafia boss, an operation that also resulted in the murder of the rival's pregnant partner. It was a message of absolute control. No witnesses, no heirs, no continuity outside the system. From that moment, his position within the organization solidified, and he began to move closer to the highest levels of Mafia leadership, including figures like Salvatore Riina, the so-called boss of bosses. In those years, Sicily was still governed in part by fear, and men like Matteo represented the next evolution of that control. Then came 1992, the turning point that changed everything. The assassination of Giovanni Falcone through a highway bomb at Capaci shocked Italy. Only weeks later, Paolo Borsellino was killed in another bombing in Palermo. The state responded with unprecedented force. The old leadership of Cosa Nostra began to collapse under pressure. Riina was captured in 1993. The organization was fractured, destabilized, and hunted at every level. In that moment of chaos, Matteo Messina Denaro understood what needed to happen. Survival meant disappearance. On June 2, 1993, he left his home in Castelvetrano and never returned. He abandoned his visible life entirely. His car, his clothes, and his public identity were left behind. He took only cash, a weapon, and a photograph of his daughter. From that moment forward, he would no longer exist in any official capacity. Every photograph used by authorities for the next 3 decades was outdated, frozen in time from before his disappearance. Unlike most fugitives who flee across borders or continents, Matteo did the opposite. He stayed in western Sicily. He did not leave his environment. Instead, he transformed it into a controlled ecosystem. Over the years, investigators would discover what he had built beneath the surface. At least 17 underground bunkers spread across farms, hillsides, and hidden rural structures. These were not temporary hiding places. They were engineered environments with ventilation systems, reinforced steel doors, satellite communications, storage rooms, and in some cases, even luxury comforts such as wine storage and entertainment systems. In one discovered bunker, police spent hours cutting through reinforced barriers just to gain access. This was not escape. This was infrastructure designed for permanence. Financing such a system required enormous resources. The Castelvetrano network generated hundreds of millions of euros annually through extortion, drug trafficking routes, and large-scale fraud involving European Union agricultural subsidies. Even renewable energy projects, such as wind farms, were exploited, with fraudulent schemes generating tens of millions of euros in illegal revenue. Entire companies were registered under false identities, including names of deceased individuals. Political and economic systems were manipulated to ensure continuous financial flow into the organization. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of his survival was not financial or structural, it was social. Entire communities in western Sicily operated under a shared code of silence known as omerta. In towns like Castelvetrano, Campobello di Mazzara, and Mazzara del Vallo, people did not simply refuse to speak out of fear. In many cases, silence was cultural, inherited, and reinforced over generations. Between 50 and 100 individuals at any given time reportedly knew where he was located. Doctors treated him under false identities. Priests facilitated communication. Businessmen, relatives, and local officials all played roles in maintaining the system. No one broke the silence. Even law enforcement faced a unique challenge. Surveillance operations were repeatedly compromised. GPS tracking failed in specific rural zones. Investigators reported that as soon as they entered certain areas, communication signals were disrupted and their movements became known within minutes. It was not just a criminal network, it was an environment that actively resisted external intrusion. As the years passed, Matteo's life became increasingly dependent on medical treatment. He developed colon cancer, a condition that would eventually contribute to his downfall. He began using the Italian healthcare system under the false identity of Andrea Bonafede. At first, the discrepancies in records were minor. Slightly different birth dates, inconsistent identifiers, small administrative errors that would normally go unnoticed. But over time, these inconsistencies formed a pattern that forensic analysts could no longer ignore. Cross-referencing multiple clinics, treatment schedules, and patient movements eventually revealed a link that investigators could pursue. By late 2022, surveillance was placed on key medical facilities in Palermo. Teams monitored patient movements for weeks, waiting for confirmation. On the morning of January 16, 2023, everything aligned. A man arrived at La Maddalena clinic, matching the profile they had been tracking. His posture, his age, his behavior, all consistent with the hidden identity they had been pursuing. When authorities moved in, the operation was executed with precision, and the man known as a ghost was finally identified in person. He was 60 years old at the time of his arrest. He wore expensive clothing, carried luxury items, and still presented the appearance of a man who had lived carefully, even in hiding. But behind that exterior was the reality of decades spent underground, managing a hidden empire while slowly succumbing to illness. In his possession were thousands of euros, luxury accessories, and signs of a life built entirely in secrecy. The aftermath of his arrest revealed the full scale of his hidden world. Raids uncovered secret apartments, personal diaries, coded letters known as pizzini, and extensive records of communication. These handwritten notes demonstrated that even in hiding, he continued to issue instructions, manage financial decisions, and maintain control over criminal operations. His influence had not diminished with time, it had simply become less visible. Matteo Messina Denaro died in September 2023 from colon cancer at the age of 61. He was buried in his hometown of Castelvetrano in the family tomb beside his father. The same state that spent decades searching for him ensured his burial was confirmed and contained. With his death, authorities dismantled remaining bunkers, arrested collaborators, and attempted to fully collapse the system he had built. But the deeper question remains unresolved. Was he truly the last of an old mafia generation, or was he a prototype for a new kind of organized crime, one that does not rely on visibility but on integration into everyday systems of society? His story suggests something more unsettling than the past. It suggests evolution, because in the end, he was not brought down by betrayal or violence. He was not defeated by an enemy or a raid. He was found because of a small inconsistency in a medical record, a single error inside a system too large to be perfectly controlled. And that is what makes this story difficult to forget. Not the scale of his power, not the decades of silence, but the simplicity of his end. A kingdom built in shadows can survive almost anything, except a mistake no one noticed in time. If you want more deep dives into hidden worlds like this, subscribe now and don't miss the next story.